Our next speaker is Matteo Capasso. Matteo is Marie Curie Global Fellow between Columbia University and the US and University of Venice in Italy. He is the author of Everyday Politics in the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, that reconstructs the last 2 decades of the country's politics leading up to the NATO-led regime change operation in 2011 that sanctioned its fall. His current research focuses on the impact of US-led imperialist policies and the political economy of war, sanctions, and militarism. He is editor of the academic journal Middle East Critique, and his work has appeared in several academic outlets, including Review of International Political Economy, World Review of Political Economy, Politics, Review of African Political Economy, Journal of Labor and Society, among many others. He is a Special Rapporteur of the International People's Tribunal on US Imperialism, Sanctions, Blockades, and Economic Coercive Measures. Matteo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bikram. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I also want to join everybody else in thanking you, the hosts, for organizing this event and inviting me to participate. Thanks, Radhika. Thanks, Bikram, Brendan, Paul, and everybody behind the scenes. It is great to be here with you, seeing also many familiar faces and comrades today online. I mean, I didn't expect this, but it seems that fascism is going to be a running theme now. Unfortunately, reality is imposing on us, and I guess we are the outcome of it in one way or another, also in our thinking. So today, my intervention, which I thought was going to be about sanctions, is actually going to have more of an existential tone. And I'm trying to reflect on the current geopolitical conjuncture by zooming into the role of Europe. I will be very honest with you. This is a rather painful exercise, especially in light of the ongoing war propaganda that it's taking place in the continent here. However, it comes without saying that it is a duty on our side to take up these painful questions in order to assess whether or not there is the slightest change or possibility for Europe to disentangle itself from the imperialist, US-led imperialist structure, thus becoming somewhat a progressive force for the good of the world, or the entire continent is destined to be consummated by the NATO-led appetite for war. It was the year 2004, and the late Third World Marxist Samir Amin had already been able to foresee what kind of future was lying ahead for Europe. Amin, after locating Europe's history in the world history of capitalism, drew on Charles de Gaulle to describe how the continent was faced with a choice between two alternatives. On the one hand, and I repeat this is the year 2004, and de Gaulle words predate 2004, there was the alternative of Atlantic Europe, in which Europe becomes an appendage of the American project. On the other side, there was the option of a non-Atlantic Europe, one which would be able to live peacefully with its neighbors, integrating, hopefully, Russia. If Amin suggested then that this conflict over the alternatives was still not resolved, I would suggest that if we fast forward to the present, almost 20 years after we are in 2023, we can comfortably say that this conflict is almost resolved, and it has been resolved in favor of the Atlantic project. Quite unsurprisingly, I would say, considering the umbilical cord that unites Europe to the US. It comes without saying that in light of the visible decline of the US imperialism, the resolution of this conflict for Europe has not made disappear the existence of other contradiction within the same continent. So on one side, Atlanticism has consolidated the fascist side of Europe. And I have to apologize here why, because I'm perfectly aware, and this has been already mentioned by many, that for many countries of the global south, it is hard to accept that Europe has become fascist only now. After all, the history of colonialism and neo-imperialism tell us otherwise. So we can say that there is a new wave of fascism, which has new features as well. I don't aim to go into a comparison between the 1930s and today. There are certainly overlaps. But fascism today is also the direct result of the failure of the liberal project. Let me just remark that as the Indian economist Utsa and Prabhat Patnaik have aptly pointed out, this new fascism is based upon three major conditions which enable its rise. First, the existence of a crisis, the crisis being the decline of US imperialism faced by the rise of countries of the South, including the BRICS, that are demanding to be treated equally in the world stage. Then we have the Western ruling class incapable to overcome this crisis, since it would mean accepting these players from the South equally, and that's not going to happen. The third, and this is what I personally consider the most critical aspect, and I speak as an Italian as well, the complete state of disarray of the left in Europe, and more, the left in Europe and more widely the left in the West. The left, and I was reminded when I was listening to Manu about the words of Gramsci, trying to diagnose the state of the left. The left has lost its compass. This is the result of a lost historical process, as we all know. After all, the creation of so-called Western Marxism, which renounced to establish an organic connection with countries of the global South, by organic I also mean theoretically, has only generated a new form of cultural imperialism. We know better how to do Marxism, basically. One of the key aspects that come to mind is how there is an increasing incapacity to differentiate between the importance of the national question for the development of progressive forces in the south of the world, a key feature of the anti-colonial struggle, and the existence of fascist nationalism. And I can see this happening really very much here in Europe. So whereas Western Eurocentric Marxism has excommunicated the majority of the world from the left, as Domenico Lo Surdo, the late Italian Marxist, used to say, I believe it has basically accelerated its end. Now, this new wave of fascism is facing us with novel characteristics. In a way, we could talk of a so-called fascism with European characteristics. So one is the increasing centrality of war to the economy of Europe. Ukraine is the only stage of what we're currently seeing. What is most worrying is how the economies of European states have developed a voracious appetite for war, forgetting about the plight of their working classes. We've seen this happening in France, in Italy, everywhere. Now, war is a double-edged sword, we can say. It is the response to a crisis, and it's being normalized. On the other, we might say that, and this is where I'd like also to hear other comrades' thoughts, war is also symptomatic of the changing of objective conditions, which might offer an opening for something more progressive. Maybe this is wishful thinking, but I'm forced to look for the light. Second, there is a renewed sense of ideological mission for humanity. Basically, the war between NATO, the war on Russia happening in Ukraine, spearheaded by NATO, is attempting to revamp a discourse of democracy versus authoritarianism, which has always been there. While I believe that this renewed wave of Western-led, European-led salvation is not being silently digested by the working masses, it is nonetheless the ideological weight of the war. War must be justified, and this is how it's happening. One must also think about the absolutely disgraceful statements that are coming from top institutions and top diplomats of the EU, that we're thinking about Joseph Borrell in the recent times, the whole garden jungle and more. At the same time, as much as Atlanticism and fascism are consolidating, there are also new contradictions emerging. There is, and there was, and continues to be, an increasing and clear division, smartly played by the Americans, between New Europe, comprising the ex-republics of the Soviet Union and Baltic states, and Old Europe. We can see this trend of thinking among numerous conservatives inside the American political class, from Donald Rumsfeld to Victoria Nuland. This division alerts us about the existence of potential frictions and divisions. We have seen, for instance, where the latest NATO meeting took place in Lithuania, and how the US had been pushing to have the former Estonian PM to head NATO. overall, I must say that the outcome of this contradiction is very hard to predict. The most important one, obviously, is that the war-driven economy is undoubtedly crashing the working and middle classes of many numerous European states. Let us think again of what has been happening in France. So while the objective conditions change and there is actually revolt taking place, unfortunately, and we were talking about this with Radik as well, the ideological grammar needed to articulate these protests is fundamentally fascist. So we go back here to the state of disarray in which the left is. So overall, to conclude, the state of Europe is rather worrying because, I mean, if we use the language of Mao, for example, you know, war is just a way, it's the form through which the contradiction expresses itself. The problem is that the war and now has become the major shape. So the contradiction is all on war now. And as such, all the progressive forces, I believe, must be focused on pushing back against this war. In his essay on contemporary imperialism, Samir Amin bluntly stated that the policy of Russia to resist the project of colonization of Ukraine must be supported. But this positive Russian international policy, unquote, is bound to fail if it is not supported by the Russian people. In other words, this support cannot be won on exclusive basis of nationalism. It is true, but as Europeans, and again, I speak this, and it's very existential for me to talk about this, considering the state of disarray in which the continent seems to head. This war is not a football match. We can't simply support one side or another. We must fight against the idea of war itself that is building up constantly, more and more. Dr. Fidel, I mean, when referring to a possible US-led war on Iran, he warned that since the US and its allies will unable to win the conventional war, they are going to use nuclear weapons. But that would be a war that they couldn't win because we are going to lose everything. I don't know why, but I feel that the warning of Fidel resonates strongly to the present conditions. And so I'd like to conclude more than with some final thoughts, more with some final questions. So for all the comrades that are here and for those following, you know, online later on. And I wonder if, do European progressive forces exist that could contribute to stop this war? Can they play a progressive part in this fight? Or is Europe historically and organically located, probably like the US, in a position where no alternative can emerge and war will continue to resolve these contradictions? How are we posing ourselves vis-a-vis this? And I really would like to hear the thoughts of everyone here. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.